The room went completely silent. Thousands of fans stood frozen, phones still raised in the air, mouths open, not because of his voice, not because of his moves, but because of what he had just said into the microphone. Bruno Mars, one of the most celebrated performers alive, was standing under blinding Las Vegas lights. He had everything a man could ever want: the money, the fame, sold-out stadiums on every continent, and yet in that moment none of it seemed to matter. Because what came out of his mouth next didn't sound like Bruno Mars the superstar. It sounded like Peter Gene Hernandez, the boy from Honolulu. The kid who used to perform in tourist hotels just to help his family eat. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Clips went viral. Comment sections filled up with thousands of people who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Fans who had followed Bruno for over a decade were shaking their heads, not in disbelief, but in deep, painful recognition. Because what he revealed wasn't about music. It wasn't about his label, his next album, or his legendary Vegas residency. It was something far more personal. Something he had carried quietly for years, behind every smile, every smooth performance, every perfectly crafted hit song. And once you hear it, you will never listen to his music the same way again. If you grew up watching music videos in the 2000s and 2010s, Bruno Mars was simply everywhere. Just the way you are, Grenade, Locked Out of Heaven, Uptown Funk. One after another, the hits kept coming, flawless, genre-defying, impossible to skip. He could sing like a soulful heartbreaker, groove like James Brown, and write a pop hook that lived in your head for weeks. Critics called him a throwback. Fans called him a genius. The music industry called him one of the safest bets in show business. By his early 30s, he had won multiple Grammy Awards, sold hundreds of millions of records worldwide, and become one of the highest-grossing touring artists on the planet. His Super Bowl halftime show in 2014 is still considered one of the greatest ever put on that stage. He had built an image that felt almost too perfect. Effortless cool, charismatic smile. Slick suits, sharp moves. Every interview he gave was warm, funny, charming, the kind of guy who made you feel like everything was always fine. But behind that carefully constructed image was a story that never fully made it into the headlines. Bruno was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, into a family where music wasn't just a passion, it was survival. His father was a Latin percussionist. His mother, Bernadette, was a singer and dancer from the Philippines. From the age of 4, Bruno was already performing Elvis impersonations, live shows at tourist spots. A beautiful, vibrant childhood built entirely around music and love. But life has a way of turning without warning. And for Bruno Mars, one of those turns came early, quietly reshaping everything he would eventually become. No one saw it coming, not even the people closest to him. When Bruno moved to Los Angeles at 18 with nothing but a demo tape and a dream, the city didn't welcome him with open arms. He landed a record deal with Motown and got dropped almost immediately. His songs weren't landing. His style didn't fit any single box. Executives didn't know what to do with a kid who sounded like he was from 5 different decades at once, so he disappeared into the background, writing for other artists. Surviving on small collaborations and writing credits, songs that became massive hits for other people, while he himself remained largely unknown. It was the kind of slow, grinding invisibility that breaks most people. And yet, Bruno kept going. He pushed through rejection after rejection with a discipline most people never saw. Because publicly, Bruno never complained. He never talked about the darkness of those years. He never let the cracks show. He just kept working, quietly, relentlessly. And eventually, everything clicked. But what happened during those quiet years, what he was carrying emotionally, even as the hits started pouring in, was something far heavier than anyone realized. Because while the world was singing along to his songs, Bruno Mars was holding something inside that he had never fully let go of. And it was slowly building pressure beneath the surface. Then came 2010. Bruno Mars was arrested in Las Vegas for cocaine possession. The story broke publicly, was covered briefly, and then quietly disappeared in the wake of his rising commercial success. He pleaded guilty, completed a diversion program, and the world moved on. But Bruno never really talked about it. Not in a way that let people understand what was actually happening beneath the surface. Years later, in rare and candid moments, he would hint at the immense pressure that surrounded his entire rise. The pressure to be perfect, the pressure to deliver, the pressure to be everything to everyone, soulful enough for the old-school fans, catchy enough for radio, authentic enough for the critics. People close to him described an artist who was deeply private, emotionally guarded. and at times, completely consumed by the weight of his own impossible standards. He sat through interviews with that same easy smile, that same warm laugh, never letting anyone get too close to the real story, but no one expected what came next. Because what was about to happen wasn't a scandal, it wasn't a feud, it wasn't a public breakdown caught on camera, it was grief, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just arrives. In 2013, Bruno's mother, Bernadette, passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. She was the woman who sang to him before he could walk, the emotional center of his family. The reason music ever mattered in the first place, and Bruno was on tour when it happened, he did not cancel the shows. Night after night, city after city, he walked onto those stages and gave everything. The smiles, the energy, the performance, while privately he was shattered. People who were there described a man running on something beyond willpower, something almost painful to witness, because from the outside it looked like professionalism. From the inside, it was something else entirely. He rarely spoke about her in interviews, but when he did, his voice changed. The easiness disappeared. The weight of it was right there on his face, unprocessed, unfinished, impossible to hide completely. For a man whose music was full of love songs and heartbreak anthems, the deepest love story of his life had been left almost entirely unsaid, and that silence carried on for years. Until the night in Las Vegas when it finally broke. Standing on that stage at 39 years old, Bruno Mars stopped performing, not in a polished, PR-approved speech. Not in a carefully worded Instagram post, not in a late-night interview where he could soften it with humor. He said it out loud, on stage, voice cracking, under the lights. He talked about what his mother meant to him, about what he had been carrying since the day she was gone, about how her voice had quietly lived inside every single lyric he had written since 2013, and how he had never fully admitted that, not to his fans, not to the world, not even to himself. The crowd didn't cheer, they cried, because in that moment, Bruno Mars wasn't a superstar, he was just a son who missed his mother. After that night, everything shifted. Fans who had adored him for his talent suddenly felt something deeper, a real human connection that no radio hit could manufacture. People began revisiting his music with completely new ears. Hearing lines differently, understanding what was underneath all those rhythms and grooves. Music journalists started writing about the emotional architecture of his entire discography, the longing in his ballads, the almost desperate joy in his uptempo tracks, and reframing it all as the work of someone who had been quietly processing grief through sound for over a decade. But then people started asking a harder question out loud. Why had it taken this long? Why had Bruno, a man beloved by millions, felt he needed to protect everyone else from his pain? Why did fame make vulnerability feel so completely impossible? And the answer, when you looked closely, was uncomfortable. Because the industry had always rewarded Bruno's polish, his perfection, his effortlessness. The moment any crack appeared, the conversation immediately shifted to his image, his brand, his likability. No one had ever given him permission to just be human. Until he gave it to himself. At 39 years old on a Las Vegas stage, in front of thousands of people who loved him, Bruno Mars finally stopped performing long enough to just feel. And that moment, more than any Grammy, any chart record, any Super Bowl performance, may be the most important thing he has ever done. Since that night, he has been noticeably more open. More reflective, more himself. He's talked about gratitude, about music as healing, about his mother's voice living inside his work in ways he is still discovering. He hasn't released a full solo album in years, and fans who once grew impatient now seem to understand why, because great art cannot be rushed. Especially not when the artist is finally learning to create from truth instead of pressure. At 39, Bruno Mars stands at a crossroads, older, quieter, more grounded, but unmistakably, undeniably himself. The boy from Honolulu who performed for tourists. The kid who got dropped from his first label. The man who kept smiling through the most painful years of his life. He's still here, still creating, still carrying his mother's song. And somehow that means everything. So what do you think? Did you know Bruno Mars had been carrying all of this quietly beneath the surface all these years? Does hearing the real story behind the music change the way you feel when you listen to him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We genuinely want to hear from you. And if stories like this hit different for you, make sure you subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Because every week, we bring you the real stories behind the biggest names in the world. Don't just be a fan, understand the person behind the fame.